Hello, everyone. I'm Janice Lee, Curator at Wellcome Collection. So for anyone who's coming visiting internationally, Wellcome Collection is a free museum and library not far from here in Houston. I think we're quite unique in what we do. We have a historical collection, a library. At the same time, we do temporary exhibition exploring health through the lens of art, science, working with community, working with different people with different lived experiences, engaging with history and society. So our latest exhibition opens this week called Thirst in Search of Freshwater. When I started working on this exhibition, I really wanted to find a way in for us to understand the really interconnected issues with climate and health, infectious disease, and mental health, which are three priority areas that Wellcome works on. And instead of focusing on water as a subject to be studied, the crux of a lot of our issues lies in our relationship with freshwater as this valuable, sacred source of life that is declining in exponential rates right now. And what is interesting is with the concept of thirst, you can think about a desire of water, the search for water, but I think in some culture, it is also an allusion to greed. And I think we can agree that sometimes that greed that drives exploitative, colonial, consumerist behaviors that really contributed to a lot of the issues we face today. So today here I have KARAN with me. I've commissioned KARAN for one of a new commission. I'll let you talk a bit more about your practice and your work.
Hi, my name is SHRESTHA. I live in Kathmandu and Delhi. I work across disciplines, and my work gets at the complexities that are embodied in the socio-economical and political dimensions of Nepali life. And for the exhibition curated by JANICE, In Search of Freshwater, I have an installation titled Water Givers, Memory Keepers, and the Shifting Forces. Yeah, that's the work. It speaks to the interconnected issues, as Janice was mentioning, about illness, disease, polluted water, but also how it is connected to social stratification and many other aspects of our life. If you see on the left-hand side, largely this work is about dengue in Nepal. For the longest time, people couldn't come from the north because of the mountains, pretty high, but also not from the south because of the forests. They were really thick and laden with malaria, and it was quite an important player in how it shaped history, the mosquito. And when I got this commission, Janice put me in touch with DHIS2 and World Mosquito Program. There was a lot of this conversation with Scott from the World Mosquito Program that I learned more about the Aedes aegypti, which originates from the sub-Saharan Africa, but which spread around because of maritime commerce, imperial expansion, and transatlantic slave trade, and also it has reached our parts of the world. And because of climate change, dengue is now in Nepal. It's there in 72 out of the 75 districts. Each year it is found in higher altitudes. And last year around 40,000 people were infected with dengue. There was a blood crisis, and the health infrastructure keeps collapsing because of this. And so looking at these issues and how they're interconnected, and I made this work, and yeah. So largely, it's also talking, for the past few years I've been making work surveying the state of water in Nepal. It started with the politics of water, and then of course I'm looking also at the relationship different communities have with water in Nepal. Nepal has 6 major climatic zones, and for a small country that's sandwiched between two larger countries, and also landlocked, the relationship to water changes quite drastically from place to place. And I feel with being able to work with different material, because every material has its own kind of sensitivities and intelligence. And I think when we speak about interdisciplinary practice, it's also being able to communicate through these materials about what we're talking about. And I should ask JANICE about what she, as a curator, what importance do you think is there in an interdisciplinary practice?
Yeah, I personally have gained a lot with working with artists like you who have a research-based practice, but through our wider Wellcome network, for example, like you said, we're able to put you in touch with some of our public health initiatives that we support. And through those exchanges, you can see there are things that the scientists would take years to figure out. For example, what touched me the most was they couldn't find out why just about 100 meters away, two villages has such drastic difference of the rate of dengue. And turns out you immediately ask them, is it the fences? And I was like, what fence? And you're saying like some villages would use waste tire that would collect stagnant water. And these are really kind of inherent knowledge because you live with these communities through your practice. This is just one really small example, but I think these are things that are not written about enough and spoken about enough, and how important having these knowledge would facilitate scientific research, would really help to speed up important groundwork that people are doing out in the field. This is just one example, and in the exhibition, I also work with, another researcher, Anthony Akiafati from the Yale School of Architecture. So he spent the last 15 years charting water system in South Asia. And then recently, in the recent decade, he's been looking into the groundwater extraction system. And he found out that New Delhi, which you also live in, and Tucson, Arizona, are the two places that extract the most groundwater. And you can imagine the contrast in population and infrastructure. And a lot of them boils down to how people approach the habits of water consumption, and he was able to use his architectural and urban landscape research with other research from other fields in geology and spatial science to kind of correlate some other groundbreaking research about the shift of the tilt of the planetary axis and how those have invisible impact to how our climate patterns changes, and how he's able to make artwork out of it to communicate these data. And something I think Mary just talked about earlier was that we need to move people. Some people are moved by numbers, but a lot of us are moved by stories. And I think that is what is so powerful about making an exhibition that is interdisciplinary, that involves a lot of voices of communities. So it's been really great to have you, and KARAN's been with us in London for a research residency as well. So this commission allowed him to spend time on the ground, traveling. It would be really great to hear a bit more on that side of like you collecting rain song, doing sound recording, living with the different people through different parts of Nepal.
In Nepal and as well as India and Bangladesh, we quite reliant on the monsoon and the rains. And I think in the public perception, there's a certain idea of abundance of water because it rains quite heavily and it floods. Nepal lies in between two tectonic plates, and so the Himalayas are the youngest mountain range, and it has, for relative to its population, it has the highest fatalities through landslides. And as I mentioned before, I've been working on making works on water, and but also going to different communities in different parts of Nepal. And something that what really struck me was, Nepal was a closed country up until 1950, and there was, in our recent history, there was a civil war for 10 years and then became a federal democratic republic. But it was under monarchy for 250 years, and suddenly it was woken up to modernity. And and what does it mean to be modern, really? I mean, that's a big question that comes again from colonial thought perspective. And when I went to these villages and various parts of Nepal, in smaller cities, and collected these songs and stories and talking to people, I think what really struck me was this a certain climate blindness that had come with modernity, because in our parts of the world we're really reliant on water, like and nature, and how these stories are not just about how do we live, but also how do we live with each other, and also how do we live with all the other forms of life that is there. You know, it's always been a social as well as sacred duty for water to go back into the earth and belong to everybody else. It was not just a resource which is increasingly being commodified and made into a product. So it is through making these works that I feel like also, I mean, there's data. Data is often done through for a very specific intent with a very specific focus. But how do these things actually come down to people and everything else, and how it is connected to so many other things in the time and space that we live in? And yeah, I was curious about how you feel about bringing artists to engage with these collections and the impact it has on these historical collections.
Yeah, I mean, just even going back to your work, I get asked a lot, how does an artwork represent research knowledge, scientific knowledge? And there's not a very good image because we're still preparing for the exhibition to open, so we don't have professional photography yet, but you can see KARAN here have 3 suspending ink drawing on cotton. And I would love for all of you to see it up close, because the layers of stories tying with, so this situates in the glacier section of the exhibition. And when we started working, you told me about, you know, like a lot of people see images of melting glacier as in climate campaign.
Yeah.
And it often stops there. It's eerie, it's tragic, what's next? So people living in glacial fields have to move, but there's also tied to your other work about expansion of national park for tourism. So when you go on a lovely tour at a national park, you're supporting the displacement of the indigenous people who are also losing habitat from receding glacier and floods and landslide. And then you tell all these stories through a really intricate drawing, but you study so in such depth with the Egyptine image that in our collection. So in our collection there is this really exquisite drawing that was commissioned by Henry Wellcome for the opening of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And that remains one of the best hand-drawn illustration of this species. And you study in depth, and is represented in the way in your imagination, in your storytelling. So it's also for us, and because of this commission, that we're able to go back to our historic collection to rethink what commissioning an illustrator in the 19th century means to a medical school. So we're all connected in this way, and it becomes really obvious that is the only way, if we're ever going to, you know, protect our habitat and our climate and each other and the modern human world, we need to have this holistic way of understanding each other's work, support each other's, elevate others' voices, but also to amplify the impact of all the specialist work. So it's been a really great process. And going back to the work, you mentioned the rain songs. So these are water vessels that you collected, and you want to talk about the significance, and then you've turned the vessels, and these are all speakers and suspended in the air. So what you see as metallic vessels, they will play the sound that you just mentioned. Do you want to share a bit more about the significance of water vessels, about water storage and shortage and water pollution?
Yeah. I mean, these vessels are playing sound installation, and the work on the right talks about what Janice mentioned, glacial melt. So, I mean, in the 20th century, like India has built like around 3,500 dams, in China around 22,000, and and Nepal's also going into this, like these hydro dreams about let's build dams, and there's all the rivers flow from north to south, and there's so much sedimentation, and of course because of seismic activity, there's been collapses of dams, and of course on one end there's an abundance of water as is spun in these hydro dreams, but at the other end there's also a scarcity of water because of poor negligent governance and state corruption. So I mean, propounding on what was mentioned earlier in the previous one is, like, of course we need to have these regulations and these laws, and which is so much of that is there in Nepal, but it's also how it is implemented and who's going to check on how it is being implemented. That is these are the fissures and the lacunae that we're dealing with, and so despite the water being there, and we have to buy water to drink, we have to buy water to use. And often people have to just keep storing water for the dry seasons during from winter to summer, and this creates ideal conditions for the dengue mosquito, for the vector. But it's also like we're living in these realities of erratic rainfall, and one end having so much damage due to flash floods, to floods sweeping away entire villages, and this one is talking about the Glof, the glacial lake outburst flood. But at the same time, there's also annual drought in the south of Nepal, which is called the Tarai region, where 50% of Nepal's population is concentrated there in just 20% of the landmass, and it's these precarious situations. And yeah, so I mean, I have been collecting these stories and also working on them in a way that's that can speak to the viewers. So yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you.
What do you want the people to take away from the exhibition?
Well, thank you so much. I think we're out of time. I think there's so much in the exhibition. We work with archaeologists, artists, architectural researcher, anthropologists, water scientists, architects, design engineers. So please, if you have a moment this week, come see it. We're open to public on Thursday, and I hope something will resonate with you. Thank you.